Epic Originals presents Creepy Cafetorium Book 6, Out, Darn Spotlight, written by Amanda McCann with Colleen A.F. Venable, illustrated by Anna Maria Young, performed by Andrea Ems. Our lovely Newville Elementary Cafetorium is known for its delicious lunches, low number of ejector seats, and wonderful stage plays. We've done productions of The Wizard is Odd, the story of a girl from Kentucky who finds herself in a magical land after spinning too quickly, and Hello Doily, the story of a matchmaker who pairs lonely people with the best yarn for making decorative doilies. And who can forget Les Miserable, a play about somebody named Les who serves food, talks constantly, and is just really miserable to be around. I'm Gertie, your guide. Some kids love to be in the spotlight. Others prefer to be behind the scenes. But it takes a whole team to pull a production together. This fall, we were going to do Hamilton, but whoa, those scripts were pricey, and the only version we could afford, Hamil tone deaf, was just painful to listen to. So, the school decided on the public domain classic Hansel and Gretel, where nothing strange ever happens, just like in the cafetorium. Today's adventure stars shy Margot Delgado, who never wanted to be in the spotlight. But sometimes the cafetorium has other ideas. Margot never raised her hand, not to ask for help, not to answer a teacher's question, not even to ask to go to the bathroom. Margot had been at Newville Elementary for a whole month, but the only time she had spoken was on the first day of class, when her homeroom teacher had asked if she was present. "Yes," Margot had whispered, barely audible. And that had been it. During gym class, when it was time to pick teams for dodgeball, Margot wasn't picked last. She just wasn't picked. Her classmates took turns calling out names. Alex. Lainey. Phyllis. Liz Dawson. Declan. Esme. Robbie. This would go on until everyone was picked, or almost everyone. No one noticed that Margot was never put on a team. As dodgeballs whizzed through the air, Margot would sit under the bleachers, sketching in her notebook and smiling softly to herself at having escaped notice yet again. This particular Tuesday, after not getting picked for a dodgeball team for the umpteenth time, Margot was huddled under the bleachers, reading a book on great scientific discoveries, when an inspiring thought came to her. If she could discover a way to turn herself truly invisible, she'd never have to hide again. She was almost invisible already, but it would be amazing to move around school without anyone noticing her at all. She could read or draw in a corner without the risk of someone coming up and talking to her. She would never have to worry about being called on in class, which meant her heart could stay in her chest, where it belonged, instead of being in her throat all the time. The shrill ring of the school bell interrupted Margot's thoughts. It was time for the cafetorium to transform from a gym into a lunchroom. Bleachers pushed flat into walls. Tables came up from the floors. The mop that Gertie said was grumpy was put into her mysterious closet until it was in a better mood. Just your normal day at Newville Elementary. Margot found a secluded lunch table in the corner of the cafetorium and took out her notebook. Her favorite things to draw were plants. She was fascinated by their quiet, unassuming natures and admired how they grew on their own. Plus, she knew more than 100 facts about them. Minding her own business, she started to draw a scientifically accurate willow tree, which can grow to 70 feet tall. Hers was only 7 inches tall, but she liked knowing it was drawn to scale. Just as she began to add pale leaves to the willow, she felt a shaft of light fall upon her. Margot shielded her eyes and looked up, wondering if the cafetorium roof had turned see-through again. To her surprise, she realized that the super bright stage spotlight was switched on and pointed directly at her. Margot jumped up as if she had been stung by a bee. Under no circumstances did she want to be in the scary glare of a spotlight. "Hey, Margot," Robbie said. "Didn't see you there." "Oh, did you draw that?" he asked with a friendly smile, pointing to her notebook. Margot froze, staring at Robbie. Robbie stared back. They might have gone on that way forever, but Robbie finally blinked, and Margot used the opportunity to sprint to another table, out of the light's beam and away from Robbie's questions. "Phew, that was weird," she thought as she settled in and got back to her drawing. But just as she started adding highlights to her willow's branches, click, she was blinded once more. Someone was shining that darn spotlight right on her. Remy, the best storyteller in the school, noticed her sitting in the spotlight. "Hi, Margot. Are you about to tell a story? I love a good story." "Yes, speech, speech, speech!" Liz Dawson cheered through a mouthful of food, crumbs flying out as she chanted. Avoiding their eyes, Margot gathered her pencils and notebook and was about to flee the cafetorium when the spotlight suddenly turned off. When she looked up, it was dark, and everyone had turned away from her as if the previous minute hadn't even happened. "That was the worst. I'm glad it's over," Margot thought as she headed off to class. The next day, Margot walked into the cafetorium, holding her newest library book in front of her face like a shield. She was not going to let that spotlight shine on her. Then she waited. And waited. And before she knew it, lunchtime was half over and she hadn't eaten anything or read any of her book, 100 Reasons Why Stage Equipment Fails. Margot smiled. Things were finally back to normal. She tucked her book under her arm and went to get her favorite lunchtime combo, a sloppy joe and chocolate milk. She made it through the lunch line unnoticed, but as soon as the first delicious bit of sloppy joe hit her tongue, she heard the click. Margot flinched, then realized the spotlight was merely pointing down at the stage. But then it started to move. Margot looked up into the rafters, trying to see the operator, but no one was there. "How could it possibly be on and moving?" she thought, just as it settled right on her. Everyone in the cafetorium turned to look at Margot. "Speech, speech, speech!" Liz Dawson started to chant again, and this time the rest of the school joined in. "Speech, speech, speech!" they yelled. It was her worst nightmare. She zigged and zagged around the cafetorium, but no matter what she did, the spotlight followed her. Margot ducked under a lunch table to escape the attention, but a familiar face popped down to look at her. "Hey, Margot, how's your visit down under, mate?" Phyllis joked in an Australian accent. When Phyllis told a joke that was actually funny, it was never a good sign. Margot scurried out from under the table and bolted toward the door. As she was running, she saw Gertie standing next to her trusty garbage can. Margot jumped in and tried to bury herself in empty milk cartons and napkins, but Gertie shook her head. "Sorry, kid, this garbage is already spoken for," she said. "Promised it to the opossums. You don't want to see them angry. I've fought them before, and I'll do it again, but right now I've got bigger fish to fry. I mean literally, there's a fish in the teacher's parking lot that's the size of a school bus." Margot groaned and climbed out. As she was scraping sloppy joe off her shirt, she saw Alex, the tallest kid in school. As the spotlight began to swing toward her, an idea popped into her head. She ran over to Alex and crouched in his shadow. Wherever Alex moved, Margot moved. Her fancy footwork was actually quite impressive. She was so sneaky that Alex didn't even notice she was there. At one point, he did feel like someone was following him and spun around like a dog chasing its own tail, but Margot moved in sync with him. She was very happy she had read The Art of Camouflage and 101 Neat Ninja Facts. She cautiously peered around Alex and could see the spotlight heading toward the other side of the cafetorium. "I did it. I figured out a solution," Margot thought. Just then, Alex pushed open the door to the boys' restroom and went inside. Margot was desperate to escape, but not that desperate. The spotlight swung around again and caught Margot in its beam. She scurried like a panicked squirrel. But no matter where she went, that glaring beam of light followed, along with the cheers of her classmates. "Speech! Speech! Speech!" She didn't even see Tiana until she had run into her, sending Tiana's armful of art supplies flying. Margot dropped to the floor and began to pick up the fallen paints and brushes. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out. It was the first time she had spoken to any of her classmates. She cringed, but Tiana just knelt down next to her. "It's okay," Tiana said. "Wow, it's nice to finally talk to you." Margot lifted her head. "Aren't you angry at me?" she asked. "Not at all. It was an accident." Tiana replied. "Help me pick up all this stuff and carry it on stage with me, and we'll call it even." Margot gathered the rest of the art supplies and followed Tiana toward the cafetorium stage. As she was handing Tiana the paint tubes, her eyes widened. They were her favorite brand of paint, True Colors. "Thanks for the extra set of arms," Tiana said as they headed up the stage steps. Margot took a deep breath. "What are you painting?" she asked. "I'm just starting a big old oak tree right in the middle here for our upcoming production of Hansel and Gretel. I love painting trees," Tiana said, turning to Margot with a warm smile. "Do you maybe want to help me? I've seen your drawings in art class, and you're really good." Margot's face lit up. Tiana thinks I'm a good artist. It was the best compliment she had ever received. "Sure," Margot shouted. Her cheeks grew red. Sure," she said more quietly. Tiana laughed and started rolling out plastic drop cloths. A smile slowly spread across Margot's face. Tiana asked her a lot of questions, and with each one, Margot became more and more comfortable. She got so relaxed that she started telling Tiana all the cool facts she knew about oak trees. "Oak trees appeared on our planet about 65 million years ago. Vikings used wood from oak trees to construct their ships and boats. An oak tree produces roughly 10 million acorns during its lifetime." Tiana smiled. "Well, that's pretty corny if you ask me." By the end of the lunch period, they had laughed so much that Margot's cheeks hurt from smiling. "Hey, it turned off," Margot said, peering up at the spotlight. She had been having so much fun that she hadn't even noticed. "What turned off?" Tiana asked. "Oh, nothing," Margot said. "Bummer, lunch period is over already. I had such a blast with you," Tiana exclaimed. Margot couldn't believe it was time to return to class. This was the fastest lunch period ever. "Thanks again for your help, Margot," said Tiana. "Now let's make like this oak tree and leave." They both laughed. "Did you know?" Margot was on the stage crew. They spent all of that lunch painting, and then the next one, and the one after that. They painted sets and built props and talked and laughed. All the while, Margot randomly blurted out the facts that came into her head as they worked. "Did you know Hansel and Gretel originated in Germany? Royal icing is the edible glue that holds gingerbread houses together. Fun fact, a male witch is sometimes called a warlock." Margot also got to wear all black because the stage crew has to be invisible during productions. Margot had gotten more than she'd ever wanted. She was finally invisible, but she'd made a bunch of other invisible friends, too. While thinking about how happy she was, Margot suddenly remembered the spotlight. She looked up. It was dark, just like it had been for weeks. At last, it was the opening night of the play. It went great. Declan was wonderful as Hansel, and Esme played a fantastic Gretel, though she insisted on wearing her bike helmet throughout the entire production. Everyone cheered as the actors took their bows at the end, and then Tiana took Margot's hand and brought her on stage with the rest of the stage crew. They bowed and basked in the applause, and maybe Margot imagined it, but even though there were a bunch of kids on stage, it felt like the stage lights were concentrated just on her. Margot smiled and yelled, "Thank you!" It was the longest speech she had ever made. After a week of performances, the play ended and the crew dismantled the set to get ready for the next production. The Wizard is Odd 2, more odder. Margot couldn't wait to paint the Emerald City. As she and Tiana were mixing up the perfect green, she saw Gertie up in the rafters, messing with the spotlight. When Gertie came back down, the custodian had a proud smile on her face. "That spotlight has been out of commission for decades," Gertie said. "But I figured out the problem. No bulb." Gertie shuffled off, wearing a big smile and carrying a ladder that was never going to fit into her tiny storage closet. With a click, the spotlight turned on, and Margot swore it winked at her. She winked back.